I'm Saheed Lasisi, and today I'm presenting to you AI enhanced API documentation. And we will be drilling down into bringing knowledge gaps and elevating developer experience within the API documentation space. Again, I'm Saeed Lasisi from JPMorgan Chase and Co. I'm representing this through API Days Paris 2024. So, what's the agenda for today? We'll be taking you through just an introduction to this particular topic through some real life statistics. Then we'll take you through challenges in API documentation generally, and then how AI can change the game. So, AI is the game changer for API documentation. Removing the grunt work, then we'll talk about capabilities of AI in API documentation. We'll talk about real world AI challenges beyond API documentation, how we can address those challenges, and also future vision of AI and the key takeaways from this particular talk. So, without further much ado, let's go. So, over 50% of buy decisions are actually influenced by developers today. That simply tells us that developers are playing a key role in getting decisions made within different enterprises, wherever they are actually investing in APIs. And as such, there is an opportunity for us to actually invest more time into API documentation. Beyond that, Gartner also says that 80% of business to business sales interactions are going to shift to digital channels by 2025. That simply means that there is a bigger nest for technical documentation generally. But with the advancement of the ways that things are done within API itself, such as Docker code and AI enhanced documentation, we see a bigger market pool for API documentation itself. And with the stats you're looking in front of you, it tells you that developers are mostly interested in good documentation, good tutorials, and technical know-how when it comes to choosing an API. And in fact, they would actually choose an API based on great documentation than performance or security, which is actually telling. So, beyond the market pool and beyond the need for documentation, we've seen that there is a gap in the market. But why is there a gap? The gap stems from, so the developer frustration actually stems out of the fact that we've got lack of documentation in some cases entirely, so they're not discoverable. As you can see, poor documentation actually demonstrates how developers are finding it hard to navigate different APIs, and 80% of them during Postman 2023 State of the API report actually reported that lack of documentation or poor documentation generally actually influenced their decisions of choosing an API. So, but what are the other things that people look at beyond just the lack of it or poor documentation generally? Poor documentation means inconsistencies, inaccuracies, complexity of navigation, complexity of the knowledge that has been disseminated, complexity of the subject matter itself, and how concise or clear the information that is being provided is. Beyond that, also, is just the complexity of the process itself. If there's a workflow or there's a process flow, people have actually complained about the complexity of that. Beyond that, outdated information is one of the bane of API documentation itself. So, how do we navigate these challenges? The technical expertise of technical writing comes into API documentation, and invariably it becomes API documentation expertise itself. So, what are the things that can help us? Subject matter expertise, know what you're actually writing about. If you invest time in knowing the subject matter that you are actually writing about, and you're an expert in that subject matter, it basically helps in trying to sell that domain better. You write with conviction. And as such, also, it's easy to convey information much more clearly and effectively because you can break down the complex information into something that is understandable. Beyond that, also, just being able to write and being able to edit and be meticulous in writing and correcting and having an ability to write drafts and be able to follow style guides or guidelines of writing itself and writing user-friendly documentation and being able to be succinct when you write It's just one of the tricks of writing good documentation. Beyond that, design skills is key, or design experience for the end user is key as well. UX experience, just to kind of like immerse yourself as the audience of your own experience and see how it feels. For example, be obsessive about the customer in terms of what they see, in terms of the experience they get. Research and audience analysis is also something that what's investing into when it comes to API documentation expertise. Being able to do market research, user research, audience research, and so on and so forth. I'm being able to kind of I see how you can evolve based on that. And learning new things every day, new tools, new concepts, new adopting new knowledge and learning new things is just something that an API documentation expert will do. And so, what are the trends in API documentation? API documentation has taken probably a bit of an uptrend in the last few years in terms of Gen AI and automation itself. But beyond that, actually, Gen AI and automation provides an ability to provide our end users interactive documentation, the ability to collaborate real time, be it with the support person or be with somebody on the other side, like developer advocacy and stuff like that. Also, the focus on user experience is now very high, as I actually said earlier in the previous slide. Apart from that, Docker is good, ensuring that the entire workflow is actually automated. The delivery of documentation today is all encoded or codified, and that ensures that we have version control, we have a way of rolling back changes, we have versioned documents, and so on and so forth. And beyond that, localization and globalization is key. Gen automation actually provides different ways of templatizing localization and globalization mechanisms, for example, and being able to kind of like be context aware and being able to adapt to that as well, and providing that as a service also on different developer portals. Generative AI, the game changer. With the advent of generative AI and then with commoditizing of generative AI through APIs and through chat engines, for example, so like ChatGPT and Co., it means that we are now focused on creating new and realistic content from unstructured inputs and accepting natural language search, for example, to provide a concrete and a generative content. And as such, this becomes the best friend of API documentation. And you will see afterwards. But also something we'll be talking about in terms of large language models, because generative AI is actually powered by LLMs. So, and they are just models that are trained with vast amounts of data to understand, generate, and predict text in human-like proficiency based on similarities. And we will get to that at some other point. So what are the capabilities of Gen AI in API documentation? Gen AI, first and foremost, kind of like boosts productivity by automating grunt work. It's the work that probably you don't want to do. Probably it's your first draft. It's that idea generation, brainstorming, taking something, refining it, and all that kind of stuff. But also probably providing snippets of something that you know about. But beyond that, it's also enhancing developer experience in terms of personalized documentation experience, interactive tutorials, or interactive guidance, and being able to get to the crux of the matter. Sometimes a Gen AI can actually just help people to get to the information they need. It's also improving accessibility and engagement. As I said, it now enables natural language search. Beyond that, it could also provide an avenue for you to be able to ensure consistency and accuracy based on your data. And that is where RAG comes in, which is retrieval augmented generation, which we're going to talk about later. Beyond that, it also extends scale, which means that based on productivity, it could actually let you scale your documentation practice. We talk about localization already. And all this means that we can enhance adoption of APIs twice or thrice faster, because we can have faster onboarding. People can actually integrate faster. People, when they need support, they can actually get it. People have better understanding. So it's an overall better experience for the developer and for everybody that is actually in the ecosystem. So, what are real world use cases today of Gen AI and APIs? So, we've talked about Plaid being able to embed this AI bot called Ask Bill, and it's a generative AI tool that provides support for whoever needs it on the website using the docs of Plaid itself. Also, Stripe introduced the Stripe Docs VS Code extension as part of their GitHub Copilot extension as well. So you can actually interact directly with Stripe Docs. And they did the same with GPT-4, just to provide a plugin to actually do this well. And all that is actually just reducing support effort from developer advocates, from support teams, and onboarding teams. So, what are the challenges that we might face when implementing or delivering AI-enabled API documentation? Probably in most cases, when things are done right, we might not face these problems. But when the scale is big, when there is multitudes of domains, we are open to experiencing these problems I'm going to mention. So maintaining accuracy, consistency, and style, all that is based on good foundations if you want to have one. And with generative AI, if there are no good foundations, then this becomes a challenge, because without good foundations, without having the proper data to train this data set, these models, for example, then we have a problem, because we wouldn't have good foundations to actually provide, let me say, impeccable documentation. Beyond that, one leads to the other. So while poor foundations are a problem, risk of hallucination and bias comes into play. So depending on if your content is already biased, for example, that will also be a problem. And apart from that, hallucinations would happen when we have knowledge gaps. So again, knowledge gaps is based on the fact that probably there is a pre-work that we need to do in terms of preparation to be AI ready, so that we can then produce AI-enabled API documentation. And we'll look at ways of actually mitigating that in subsequent slides. But before that, there's also the risk of prompt injections and brute force attacks. And apart from that, also, we face compliance risks as we now extend API documentation into AI-enabled businesses, for example, and we'll see that. But these problems are not actually unique to API documentation. They spread across the AI delivery landscape, and we'll see how that plays out in the next slide. So real-world Gen AI challenges are the same as API documentation challenges. Once you go past just providing API documentation for, once you provide API documentation for business applications, you then need to take care of more things than you would have done. So in Postman State of API Report 2024 and Writer.com State of AI Report 24, what we found out was that security, data protection and compliance, and data provenance were top pain points in AI integrations. So that simply means that generative AI is no longer that futuristic fantasy of a dystopian future, but it is right here in front of us. The reality has kicked us that for us to develop business applications and go to production and be live with them, there are so many things we now need to think about, and these are critical roadblocks. Building trust now comes to play, since we've now seen those critical roadblocks like security. Data actually leads us to why we need to actually ensure that we're trustworthy when we actually provide AI services for clients or for businesses. Number one, we need to look at bias. We need to look at data privacy. We need to look at different compliance elements. We need to ensure that we understand the copyright implications of the data that we are using. And that is also leads us to data provenance as well, which we'll talk about later. We also have to look at the ethical nature of what we're providing and the data that we are actually providing as well. And also, whatever solution we provide, whatever we provide with AI, whatever we enable, we also need to understand if it's accurate and if it's explainable. And we'll get to that. But just to give you some data also, what we've also found out is that 88% of companies estimate that it will take at least 6 months for them to have a reliable in-house AI solution, which means that because of these bottlenecks in the AI risk that we face, it's now becoming more difficult to take something from development to production and make it operationally ready. So it simply means that probably there is a need to take a step back, plan ahead, invest in the right things so that you can then start adopting AI for your businesses much more effectively. Okay, so let's go. So, first and foremost, based on the fact that data and security is probably the utmost problem that people face while going to production, it is essential that everything starts with data. We go to data and address data risks and governance. Data risk in terms of governance, in terms of provenance, in terms of access and control, and all that. Because it underscores the need for robust strategies in actually adopting AI for production purposes. 61% of companies have already experienced accuracy issues with generative AI. And as such, looking at data again, understanding where the data is coming from, who can access it, who consented to the data, how it is used, how accurate is the data, if it is certified itself. And all that can actually ensure that all forms of accuracy issues are addressed at the very beginning. And the risk actually around data also is thought about at design time. So I'll take you through some of this quickly. So tackling accuracy and explainability risks. We talked about data, we talked about the security of data, the access of data, the provenance of data. But the next one to talk about is tackling accuracy. Unreliable outputs, hallucinations, weak operational integrity of AI-driven processes itself are the risk you face when you can't tackle accuracy and explainability. And the impact is that you misinform people, your decisions are flawed, people actually don't trust and accept your solution. But there are different ways you can actually mitigate against this. Design a mechanism of updating data to improve accuracy, which means training data. Continue to improve feedback mechanism. So provide a feedback mechanism of testing your data in real time, so that you can take real world feedback and take it into the process of training your data or your AI process itself. Beyond that, human oversight is important in critical decision-making processes, and also you can use that human oversight to form a feedback loop to the AI workflow itself. Beyond that, there are techniques to kind of like retrieve augmented information from the real world to kind of like improve generated content accuracy and relevance, and that is where RAG comes into play, which is actually an additional layer above your LLMs to provide additional context and real-world external knowledge retrieval. Beyond that, for explainable AI, there are methods such as local interpretable model agnostic explanations. We've got counterfabulations and different counterfactual explanations and so on and so forth. But there are ways of combating that. And explainability is still a research topic that different researchers within the AI industry are still trying to explore, and there's still more to come in this space. To further augment the way to tackle accuracy and explainability, transforming your AI and software delivery lifecycle with DDD is important, because it gives you an avenue to discuss a problem space, have a shared vision within a problem space, be able to create a ubiquitous language that is actually based on a glossary of terms, and also that is based on different entities, that is based on relationships, and all these artifacts that you produce out of your domain-driven design actually helps AI in gaining more context as you provide them as artifacts to a RAG. And as I said earlier, RAG is retrieval augmented generation that provides external knowledge retrieval of what I call it, of data at real time when somebody actually prompts AI. So you could be asking a question, you could be conducting research or trying to analyze data. But the thing is, as you can see on the diagram there, is that beyond being able to connect your knowledge bases, you could also have a way of connecting your domain-driven artifacts, your behavioral-driven design artifacts, for example, to provide more relevance and accuracy to the different queries that you receive and prompts from your LLMs, and as such provide more robust feedback. And also, RAG generally doesn't have to be a single agent RAG. It could be multi-agent, and they could all be differently specialized in different things. And as such, they provide better and bespoke data or knowledge for different domains where domain-specific knowledge is required. And also, if we look at data privacy risk, there are things that you can do, and there are probably things that we do already in terms of data usage, access controls, encryption, anonymization. And in terms of bias, there are things that we could do in terms of diversifying our training set, pre-processing data, conducting fairness assessments, and also labeling data using a feedback loop, as we said, for example, updating models regularly, and using human in loop actually to do random tests. And then when we talk about prompt injection, this is one of the probably greatest security attacks on AI prompts generally. And again, same as APIs, for example, and other UI or data channels, for example, the things that you need to do are also the same. The strategies are input sanitization, rate limiting, using role-based access control to ensure that even if this passes through, you're able to. And so, yep, shadow compliance is also something that you need to think of. If there are things that you want to be compliant with, you have to ensure that at the very, very beginning itself, you're able to catch all this at the gateway layer before it goes through downstream. And also, when we take a look at maintainability, it is difficult to maintain AI applications as compared to traditional software applications, simply because models go out of date. And sometimes also, if your RAG infrastructure isn't connecting to up-to-date knowledge bases, then you face the same problem as well. Also, in terms of design, for example, like flows, architectural diagrams, because some are actually just drawn out manually with tools like VCU and all that, it means that it's hard to reproduce these diagrams in real time. And as such, some of the designs also are just, they become technical debt if they're not taken care of. So other things we can look at is enforcing version control in documentation diagrams, for example, using standards in terms of writing documentations, using standards that AI easily understand, such as Markdown, using Mermaid, Plant UML, architecture as code tools that ensures that everything is version control. And as such, when you prompt the AI to design a particular diagram using a particular tooling, provided you have examples in your data set, it has something to pick up and refactor and actually make it better. And compliance. And this is probably the most interesting for most people. There is so much compliance ground to cover when it comes to AI. And there are a lot of mitigation strategies, but most times people develop and design their AI applications and they get to the end of the software delivery lifecycle before they start tackling compliance. I think the best way to approach compliance and legal is to actually bring to shift left compliance to make technologists, software engineers, product people understand the compliance and legal ramifications of AI at the very, very beginning of a project so that they can bake that into the design. They can shift left the entire compliance approach. They can have their checklist. They can see how they are closing out these applications as they build them in terms of compliance as well. And we can understand that this sometimes also can actually strangle innovation. But the way to do this is to understand that you can innovate at the same time being compliant, which means that as you develop and you design, you also understand, you also have to kind of like brainstorm on how to mitigate compliance bottlenecks right from the start. And so, envisioning a future for API documentation, we see reduction in developer friction in terms of onboarding. We see we'll see also faster onboarding as a result of that. Improved satisfaction and high adoption rates is something that would actually just be a natural evolution based on that. And APIs that are self-documenting and developer-centric are going to be the next phase. And lastly, context-aware dynamic content-based creation will be something to look forward to in terms of being able to see a developer within their context and be able to use that context awareness in their interactions. And wrapping it up, the age of AI enablement is where we are. AI is gonna do a lot in terms of improving API documentation. It will elevate developer experience. Shift left governance is gonna be the theme of the day, probably by the time we actually revisit this topic next year. And then knowledge is power, so which means that certified knowledge bases are crucial to fueling AI accuracy and explainability. And lastly, in terms of innovation, we should start small, iterate, learn, refine, and evolve. And that is the way. Thank you. And I've got, if you have any questions, you can connect and ask. And you could also scan the QR code to download um, this particular slide. Thank you. And that's it. Some other time we'll see you again. Bye.